Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Aaron Highwarren, your Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas Regional Coordinator, and your host for this evening's Tweetorial, a Region 24 educational event. This is our third Tweetorial that we developed in response to requests for some local educational material and tutoring. This evening, we'll be offering a complement to our previous Tweetorial on bird habitat and behavior by examining identification techniques. Another obvious element to successful atlasing. So yes, there's going to be some overlap. That's expected, and it's deliberate. As was the case with Tweetorial 2, it's important to recognize that identification is a huge topic and one that can't really thoroughly be covered in the limited time that we have together this evening. Our guests are going to offer advice on identifying birds on site and by ear. I know you'll find their presentations instructive, either to confirm that your approach to birding is shared by others, or to perhaps give you a slightly different perspective to figuring out just what bird you've observed. Our intent is to keep things light and informative and leave plenty of time for your questions. The success of the tutorial, however, rests on your participation and engagement, so please feel free to join in. If you have a question, please feel free to post it through the chat feature. I'll be helped again this evening by Vince Fison. We'll keep an eye on the questions. I'd now like to introduce Adam Smith. Adam is a senior biostatistician with the Canadian Wildlife Service and an adjunct professor at Carleton University. His training is in biology, and over the course of his graduate studies, he reluctantly transformed from a field biologist into a statistician. Now, he specializes in using broad-scale bird monitoring data, North American breeding bird surveys, Christmas bird counts, eBird, shorebird migration surveys, and such, to model changing bird populations and to investigate the causes behind those changes. In his private life, he is a director of the Ottawa Bird Count, a citizen science project that studies birds in a growing city. Through the Ottawa Bird Count, Adam teaches chirps, tweets, and trills, a course on bird song identification that has had more than 500 participants since 2008. He loves to bird while out skiing, hiking, and canoeing with his family. He's a father of two very boisterous boys, and he's doing his best to allow them to discover the joys of birding on their own. At the start of the last Ontario Atlas, he was just learning to bird. By the final year, he was completely addicted to point counts. He's also profoundly grateful for the efforts of volunteer birders who have contributed to projects like the Ontario Atlas. That's because his PhD research was entirely based on data from the previous Atlas and the Ottawa Bird Count. Now, the scientific research that is his day job is only possible because of the 50+ years of field work from volunteers with the Breeding Bird Survey, Christmas Bird Counts, eBird, and others. But before we hear from Adam, we're actually going to hear from Tony Beck first. Tony is a freelance naturalist and photographer based here in Ottawa. Tony, for 40 years, he's traveled the globe in search of wildlife and photo opportunities. Since 1993, he's worked as a professional photographer and naturalist. Currently, along with his wife, Nina Stavlund, he operates Always an Adventure, a company offering a variety of photography and bird watching services. His award-winning work appears in many books, field guides, websites, magazines, and calendars. An enthusiastic, skilled, and popular guide, Tony regularly takes groups around Eastern Ontario and Southwestern Quebec to look for birds, nature, and of course, photo opportunities. Since 1995, he's worked with several travel agents as a nature tour guide, birding guide, and photography instructor. His travels include many exciting international destinations, including the tropical Pacific, Middle East, Africa, tropical America, both polar regions, and throughout all of North America. And with that introduction, I'd like to turn the floor over to Tony.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Aaron. Let's get this presentation up and running. Here, just bear with me. All right. So we all want to be better birders. We want to be efficient and accurate. And many of us like to contribute to citizen science. And there's no better way to do that than through a bird breeding atlas. I did the Quebec bird breeding atlas and the first Ontario bird breeding atlas. And I'm only going to be doing a little bit of this year's atlasing because of my schedule, but I hope to get out into the field. But anyways, identifying birds is more than just looking at them. It's recommended that you observe in a systematic manner. You want to be thorough and you want to be accurate. So this evening, I'm going to show you the way that I look at birds, and it's a structure that you can adopt and maybe modify to suit your own comfort zone. A lot of birders like to develop their own style, but the idea is that you do your birding in a thorough and accurate manner.
Tony, I don't think you're screen sharing there. Do you want me to run it or?
Oh, hang on a second. I'm not screen sharing. Hang on a second. Where's the screen share?
Down at the bottom, bright green button.
On the bottom of which page? Okay, I got it. Yeah. All right.
Yep.
Here we go.
There you go.
All right. So you see it now?
Not yet. There we go.
Okay, excellent.
It's coming. There.
How's it look now?
Awesome.
Okay. Anyways, so to start off, we can often identify birds just by a minimum of information. The British World War II pilots, back in the Second World War, they identified enemy aircraft just by preliminary information, their first impressions. So they called it identifying the enemy by the aircraft's jizz. You could say jizz, G-I-S, general impression and size, but it's pronounced jizz. So you can use whatever an acronym you wish. But the idea is that you bring that attitude with you when you're observing nature and wildlife. So identifying things by your first impressions. One of the first things you should notice is the bird's size. And the best way to judge size is by comparing to species that you're already familiar with. So a small bird like a chickadee, everybody's familiar with that. So if it's smaller than a chickadee, maybe it's a kinglet or maybe a brown creeper. If it's larger than a chickadee, maybe it's a white-breasted nuthatch, so on and so forth. The next common species that everyone should be familiar with is a robin, a medium-sized songbird. So if it's smaller than a robin, maybe it's a bluebird. If it's larger than a robin, or even longer than a robin, perhaps it's a thrasher. The next size up is American crow. Everybody is familiar with crows. Let's say you've got a heron and it's about the size of a crow. Well, that's almost certainly a green heron. And then large birds, a very common large species is Canada goose. So if you've got a huge bird, bigger than a regular Canada goose, but it's got long legs, maybe you've got a great blue heron. So if it's a really big bird, way bigger than a Canada goose, with a white head and a white tail, you've probably got yourself a bald eagle. But the idea is that you compare what you're unfamiliar with things that you're already familiar with, and to get a sense of the bird's size. Now, the next thing to notice is the bird's shape. And quite often, that's all you need. You don't need any detail whatsoever. In fact, Roger Torrey Peterson recognized the significance of this. In his early field guides, in the liner notes, he has a lot of the birds there in their silhouette. Birds perched, and then birds in flight. So the whole idea is that you can identify birds simply by their shape. Now, what you see here on the screen, maybe it's an egret, maybe it's a crane, but it's almost certainly a great blue heron because you can see the plumes on the back of the head. But that's a shape that most people will recognize without having to see any details. And then, of course, there are some birds that are unmistakable. They stand out, and that's because they have a lot of bold characters, such as bold colors or a very unique shape. So here blue jay, blue and white with some black marks and a crest. There's nothing that you could confuse this with. So the next thing to take into consideration is, what are you hearing? When you're out in the field, what sounds do you hear? And I cannot overemphasize how important it is to recognize birds by their sound. It's a process and it takes some effort. What I used to do as a youngster, I would play audio recordings and then study it with a field guide. When I'm out in the field, I would drive around and play those recordings over and over again. Before I traveled to a new destination, I would play recordings from that destination, and it would really make my birding very, very efficient. In fact, sometimes, especially during the breeding season, I'll go into a forest and I've identified 80% of my birds in that spot just by the vocalizations. So the song, of course, is only during the breeding season, or primarily during the breeding season, and the bird is establishing its territory. It's trying to attract a mate, but it's also trying to warn competitors that that area is taken. So other things to listen for are the call notes. A lot of people are familiar with black-capped chickadee call notes. You go to Britannia or a Greenbelt Trail and you'll hear them coming. Of course, they'll want food when they approach you. But many birds have unique call notes, not quite as unique as their songs. So it does take a little bit of effort, but with practice, it can really, really enhance your birding abilities. Other things to listen for are alarm calls. Crows are famous for mobbing predators such as great horned owls or red-tailed hawks. And now that ravens are very common in the area, they seem to be mobbing a lot of ravens. But when you hear those alarm calls and you recognize them as such, you know that there's possibly a predator somewhere in your proximity. And I'll make some effort to try and locate what's causing the alarm. So the alarm, of course, is the birds are alerting other animals in their proximity that there's danger about. And many birds will do this, red-winged blackbirds, starlings, chickadees. In fact, my lifer saw-whet owl was thanks to some angry kinglets. So I heard the kinglets, I heard that they were giving off alarm calls, and I went deeper into the forest, and there's this saw-whet owl at about 5 feet away from me. So learn to recognize the alarm calls. Now, not all sounds that birds make are vocal. That they're sometimes made by friction with air, and for example, a nighthawk, when it does its display on territory, it'll do the dive, and as it's curving upward, the air going through the wings, it creates a booming sound. Other birds that make sounds that are not vocal ruffed grouse does their drumming on territory. And of course, not always, birds will make sounds with their wings. It may not be a territorial sound, but it will help you make an identification. Quite often I'll hear ravens by the whistling of their wings even before I see them. And many ducks whistle when they fly, as do mourning doves. So learn the sounds, and it will greatly enhance your ability to identify birds. So noting behavior is very important as well. Many birds will have a tendency to bob their tail or to pump their tail or flick their tail. Red-winged blackbirds can do this. They do this quite regularly, both males and females. So even a distant blackbird where you can't see any detail, if you see it flicking its tail, then you know it's not a cowbird. You'll know that it's a redwing. Other birds that do this is kestrel. Merlin doesn't pump his tail, but a kestrel does. So if you just see a silhouette off in the distance and it's pumping its tail, you'll know you've got a kestrel. Phoebes are famous for pumping their tail. Cardinals, spotted sandpipers pump their tail. The water thrushes do this as well. So most field guides will describe the behaviors that will help you in the field. Some birds will bob their head as they move through their environment. Some ducks do this. Wood duck is one. Common gallinule is another. It's not the duck, it's a rail, but they bob their head as well. The shorebirds in the genus Tringa, they do some head bobbing, but don't expect to find any Tringas in the Ottawa area breeding. Maybe if you're really lucky, you might get a solitary sandpiper, but beware. Look for other evidence if you want to put it onto the atlas. So birds will forage for food, and they have certain feeding styles. Puddle ducks will go for food at the bottom of the water, usually with their rear ends out of the water. Geese and swans will do this as well. Some birds, like woodpeckers, for example, they will probe or drill into trees. Shorebirds probe into mud. Sparrows, many of them, will scratch in leaf litter. So how they're feeding will help you in making an identification. Many birds have unique flying styles. Some birds will hover, such as belted kingfisher. Hummingbirds are well known for hovering. They can hover and move forward and backward as they're hovering. Ospreys will hover. Some birds undulate as they fly, so they go up and down. So when they flap a few times, and then they'll take a rest, fold their wings in, and when their wings are folded in, they drop, and then they start to flap again and they rise. So woodpeckers are famous for this, and as are finches. So falcons are very, very direct and fly with purpose, so you won't see them undulating, but kestrels will hover occasionally. So how does the bird move through its environment, its mobility? So as I mentioned, woodpeckers, they're drilling in trees, so they climb up and down trees. They're designed with stiff tail feathers so that they can perch upright against a tree. Black and white warblers will can walk around tree trunks as well. Maybe not as well adapted as woodpeckers, but other species to look for, climbing around trees, or nuthatches and brown creepers. Oh, hang on. Sorry. So some birds swim, of course. Ducks, loons, and cormorants, coots and gallinules as well. Some birds walk, such as horned larks, and some birds hop, and some birds will do a bit of both. So it's good to watch the behavior of how the bird is moving around. So another important thing to consider is the habitat that you're in, or more importantly, the habitat that the bird is in. So where did you see the bird? So a good example is a wood thrush. Wood thrush is very comfortable inside a thick forest. In fact, I've never seen a wood thrush outside of a forest. And I'm sure that if it would find itself out in the field, it would be out of its comfort zone. So it's important to look at the habitat. Alternately, something like a savanna sparrow, they like to be out in the open. They breed out in open fields, and you're unlikely to find a savanna sparrow inside a forest. That is where it's, the field is its comfort zone. The forest would be uncomfortable for it. So also the timing. What's the season? When did you see the bird? Something like a chipping sparrow. It's a very common breeder in the Ottawa area, but it's just a regular sparrow looking very similar to some other species of sparrow. But chipping sparrows are extremely rare in wintertime. So you're unlikely to see them in winter. And on top of that, they lose their rusty cap. However, a similar looking species, the American tree sparrow, has the rusty cap, but they're very common in winter. And as far as I can tell, there are no summer records of American tree sparrow in the Ottawa area. So it's important to consider the time of year that you're making your observation. Wilson snipes are common breeders in wetlands throughout our region. You can find them in the breeding season, but also in migration. But dowitchers, they're uncommon to rare migrants. Typically, short-billed dowitcher could show up in late May, early June, and again in fall migration. This long-billed dowitcher is quite rare in Ottawa and was only recorded in early fall and occasionally late fall. So if you haven't made an identification after taking into consideration all that I've just talked about, then it's time to look at the detail of the bird. And this is where it's good to study your field guides. Every good field guide should have a page showing you the topography of the bird. So what you normally do is, well, you familiarize yourself with the parts of the bird. You don't have to memorize the names. It's just be aware of the different parts and when you're looking at it, and try to narrow it down to individual feathers if you can. So normally you start with the head and you work your way down, the crown, the eye, you look at the bill. Is there a supercilium or an eyebrow? Is there a line through the eye? Is there any marks along the auricular? Is there a moustachial mark? Any marks on the throat? And then you go to the rest of the bird, the back, the chest, the belly, the wings, the legs, the toes, the rump, and the tail. And then if you can, try to look for marks there on the bird's wings as well. So when you have your unidentified bird and you look at it, you know it's a warbler. Then you look at the details, you start at the head, you can see that this bird has a bright yellow crown. It has a little bit of a white eyebrow, and then it has a black eye line and a very thick moustachial mark there, especially they're coming down from the lores at the base of the bill and down following the edge of the throat. You can see that the chest is basically unmarked. There's some brownish color on the sides, and you look at the wings have bright feather edges. In fact, the coverts of the flight feathers, when they have pale tips on a folded wing, they form wing bars. It's important to notice things like that, any markings on the wing. And this chestnut-sided warbler here, it should jump out at you as such after you've studied your field guide and familiarize yourself with the species. And then you look at it, and you can see that it fits the illustrations in the field guides and the notes in the field guide, and based on your understanding of the topography. Very important with warblers is the undertail and the underside of the tail feathers. The distribution of pattern there can often be an important character for some of the more difficult warblers to identify. And as well, if you've got the bird in flight, or if it's showing you its wings, any pattern that you can find there on the wing can be very, very important. So just a little bit to add for the bird breeding atlas. What evidence should you be looking for? And it's easy to find birds in the proper habitat, but that is not really breeding evidence. So always try to improve, try to upgrade the status of the bird in the square that you've that you're responsible for. Try to upgrade the status by getting better evidence. So you can start with suitable habitat. That's easy, but it's not confirmation. Finding a bird singing on territory on consecutive days is an improvement on that. This is good evidence. Again, it's not confirmation, but it's pretty good. But even better than a bird singing on territory is the bird behaving in an agitated manner, or is it trying to distract you? So here I had a swamp sparrow, and it was trying to make itself look bigger. So almost certainly there had to have been a nest nearby, an active nest. Of course, killdeer are famous for their distraction displays, doing the broken wing act. I've seen ruffed grouse do it. I've seen a number of songbirds do it as well. So look for agitated behavior. Is the bird upset that you're there? Because if it is, then it's almost certainly behaving in a protective manner, and it's got young that it wants to defend. One of the easiest ways to confirm breeding is observing a bird carrying food. If the bird has got food in its beak and it's not eating it, then you know that that food is for a species, for young, for something else. So it's going to carry that food to the nest. So this is one of the better ways of upgrading the status of breeding in your squares. And of course, the ultimate is actually finding an active nest. This is the best evidence that you can find. But please be respectful of the nest. The worst thing that you could do is do something drastic that would cause the bird to abandon its nest. So just that little cautionary bit there. Always respect the wildlife. I would certainly feel bad if I was responsible for causing the bird to abandon the nest. Anyways, that's it in a nutshell. So I would say on with what Adam has to offer you.
First, Tony, we have a couple questions that maybe you could answer.
Okay.
First one by Kelly. Would birds give out an alarm call due to my presence? So if you're walking somewhere and you start hearing an alarm call, could it be because you're there rather than a predator nearby?
Well, I've never experienced birds being upset at me unless I'm doing something like for example, the swamp sparrow. I was there right next to a cattail marsh, and I started squeaking, and the squeaking sound was what got it upset. So it was upset at me for that. But if I'm just going through an environment and just minding my own business, just trying to identify things without interfering, then no, I've never had birds get upset. It's usually some kind of a predator, such as a fox or a crow. A fox or an owl or a hawk. Perhaps somebody walking their dog might get them upset, but I've never seen the concentrated mobbing efforts that were illustrated in that photo of the great horned owl and the crows. I've never seen that with humans or with people walking dogs. It's always been with a predator that those birds were familiar with. Now, you wouldn't consider a raven as a predator, but crows would. Crows and ravens don't get along, so crows will mob ravens.
Great. And a second question is, what field guides do you like? What are your favorite field guides?
Well,
you probably have a bookcase full of them.
I do. I have over 300 bird books.
Wow.
But my favorites is the Sibley Guide, 2nd edition. This is a really excellent bird identification tool. It's not really a field guide because it's so thick, but it just lays out all the species in the same manner so that you can make comparisons. The 2nd edition has fixed a lot of the mistakes that were in the 1st edition. But the other one, I have it here somewhere. Yeah. My second favorite, well, actually, they're tied. They're both a little different, but it's always good to have a second opinion. And that's the National Geographic, and they're up to the 7th edition. So always get the latest edition. Yeah, there you go. That's not the 7th edition, though. Anyways, this is another excellent field guide. The text is really good. The range maps are quite good as well. And the illustrations are very detailed, a lot more detailed than in the Sibley Guide. So I recommend both of those. Now, a lot of people say that the Merlin app, there's some good programs out there. In fact, if I've got a bird identification challenge, one of the first things I'll do is go straight to the internet and look for images of what species I think that I'm looking at. But I quite often find myself going back to the books as well. And sometimes I even find myself looking at European field guides, such as the, yeah, here it is here. The best field guide ever made, the Collins Bird Guide, The Birds of Europe. And I've even used this for some North American birds in the past. So the bottom line is you can never have enough good bird books, but certainly start off with the Sibleys and the National Geographic.
Great, thanks a lot. I think that's it for questions for now.
Okay, so Adam, floor is yours.
Okay, so
Tony, you're gonna have to turn yours off there.
Okay.
Awesome.
there we go.
Okay.
Okay, I hope you're seeing my screen now.
Yep.
Super. Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone. I see there's quite a few people in the meeting here. This is exciting. And thanks, Tony. That was brilliant. 300 bird books. I'm so impressed.
Well, back in the early days, if the word bird was in the title, I bought it. It's a little overwhelming nowadays. So many bird books.
Sweet. Brilliant. Okay, well, so I'm going to follow up, I guess, with what Tony just did, and hopefully sort of complement some of what he was talking about, but specifically focusing on the identification by sound. And yeah. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to cover in a nutshell, I'll try and convince you that you should learn birdsong IDs if you haven't already. I'll convince you also that if you haven't already, you probably actually know more than you think you do. I'll talk a little bit about the mind games, the process of learning to identify birds by sound, a little bit about the characteristics of bird songs, the general impression size of the sound, and then I'll give you a tour of some of the really incredible tools that have developed over the last 10 years, well, 10, 15, 20 years, to help folks like myself learn how to recognize the sounds of the natural world. And then at the very end, I'm going to put a little plug in for the data because learning to identify birds by sound is tremendously powerful in terms of improving the information that can be gathered by your efforts in the field. So number one, to start off, why? So imagine yourself wandering into a forest. It's say Gatineau Park. You've gone across the, well, no, it's not. LaRose Forest. Why would we go to Gatineau Park this year? Anyways, so you go into LaRose Forest and you're hearing a wood thrush. What are the chances of seeing it? Well, if you're me, just about zero, because they never come out for me. At least that's my experience. But the chances are you're going to hear it. And later on that evening, you might come back, there'll be more of them singing. There might be some hermit thrushes just down the road singing. You never see these birds. And so one of the main reasons for learning how to identify birds by sound is that you will perceive far more birds than you would have otherwise. So your experience increases, but also the counts that you're gathering for the atlas, for your eBird checklist, etc., are going to be that much more complete. So it improves the data, improves the counts. It's also omnidirectional. And what I mean by that is, imagine yourself with your binoculars up, staring at something. You miss a lot. All kinds of things could be flying by or hopping over your feet, and you'd be blissfully unaware of it. But if you're tuned into the sounds around you, even if you've got your eyes closed, you're going to know that the birds are there. You won't ever be facing the wrong direction to hear the gnatcatcher in the bushes. You may have gotten too old to hear the gnatcatcher, but you won't be facing in the wrong direction at least. And also on top of that, atlasing as a process in terms of that behavior that indicates breeding activity, singing on territory is a clue to possible breeding activity. So for starters, if you've never considered this, if you think, oh my God, this is too difficult for me. Well, for starters, I know you know this. There's no way you don't recognize that sound. I hope that's coming through. If it's not, somebody let me know. You probably know this sound. And if you live in any of the urban suburban areas of the city, or just about anywhere in the province for that matter, you've probably been waking up to this sound for the last couple of weeks. Waking up at 3 a.m. if you're in the city. You probably also know this one. The Here, Sweetie, or Cheeseburger song of the black-capped chickadee. And here's one that if you didn't know, once you've heard it, you'll always recognize it. You'll never get it wrong. So hopefully the richness of that sound is coming through a little bit, but that's the throaty, clunking sound that could only be an American bittern. So you probably already know a lot of sounds that birds make already, if you haven't just thought of it before. And it's not that difficult to learn more. The real tricks, and I'll try and convey some of them to you here today, the real tricks to getting good at identifying birds by sound is, well, simply practice. Think of it as a muscle, and you need to work that muscle in order to develop it. But at its core, it's really extremely simple. You know, you recognize the sound of your children's voices from across the playground. You know when one of them is hollering and not somebody else's kid. You recognize the sounds, the voices of the people around you. You recognize sounds in your daily life because you practice identifying them. You hear them in your daily life and you know what that sound is. And so that's really all it comes down to when you're listening to bird sounds and learning to identify them. It's just practice, practice, practice. And one of the wonderful things about modern technology is that the ability to practice has just exploded in the last 10 or 15 years. It used to be that, you know, if you really wanted to learn how to identify bird sounds, you needed to have a really good friend who was like Tony, who was around, who would go out in the field with you and say, no, 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 that's still not a cowbird. That's a cowbird over there. That's a chickadee. So that you don't necessarily need that anymore because of all this technology that's out there. So embrace the technology, and I'll give you a little overview of some of the really cool tools in a second. But also get outside and practice. You know, if you can see the birds singing while you're listening to it, there's something about that does a really incredible, has a really incredible way of cementing that knowledge in your mind. But also know what to expect. You know, if you pull out the Sibley Guide to North America or the Audubon app, there are hundreds of species in there. But frankly, when you go out on any given day, anywhere in Ontario, there's 30 or 40 species you're almost guaranteed to hear. And so start with the common ones. Start with the ones that you expect to hear every day, and also know what you're likely to hear at that time of year, in that habitat. The same kinds of features that you think about when you're trying to identify birds visually, you can apply that same strategic thinking to your identification of sounds. And some of the technology actually helps a lot with that these days as well. I'll touch on that. Also the mnemonics, you know, the handy phrases. sweet, sweet shredded wheat, the yellow warbler, and there are a couple more I'll mention later on. Those are handy. Don't get too hung up on them. If they don't work for you, forget it. There are a couple of them out there. Like for me, the cheeseburger thing and chickadees, they're clearly not saying cheeseburger. I'm sorry, everyone else is wrong. They're definitely saying here, sweetie. It's just totally the wrong sound. So if that particular mnemonic doesn't work for you, drop it, move on, find another one. Bring up your own, make up your own mnemonics. Tricks for remembering the sounds in your mind. Also, in terms of that friend and developing those connections to the community, certainly it's harder these days, but fingers crossed it's going to get easier sometime soon. If you can engage for example, the Ottawa field naturalist, and get out in the field with other people who know lots of their bird sounds, that is just an incredibly powerful way to increase your knowledge. And one quick note there on the left of the screen, a little note about Cornell's website. They've got some brilliant tools on their website. They're useful as well. So the characteristics of a bird song. So to start off with, I've kind of broken it up into these sort of 6 categories of things that I think about. This I've stolen, pirated from a number of different places, particularly some of Cornell's work, some of the information on their website. So the tone of voice is one that's a little bit, I think of as the quality of the sound that you almost recognize in a subconscious level. You can think of different whistles, things like the black-capped chickadee, the very clear whistle. You can categorize songs as sounding kind of nasal. Oh, it disappeared. Bear with me there for a second. Like red-breasted nuthatches, they've got that yank sound that really it's a very sort of annoying nasal sound. There are throaty sounds. There's the pied-billed grebe. There are also throaty sounds that ravens make, that sort of water dripping, liquidy kind of sound. The buzzy free beer call of the alder flycatcher. The annoyingly repetitive chebec of the least flycatcher. I'm using words like annoying. They're not really annoying, of course. They're wonderful. If you heard it once, you'll get to hear it again. There's the trills. There's a chipping sparrow. That dry, fast, repeated trill. There's those harsh sounds like blue jays and the red-tailed hawk. There's the fluty, almost ethereal quality of thrush song, the hermit thrush. There's some of those liquid sounds, like the brown-headed cowbird. Keep clicking in the wrong spot. And speaking of sounds you'll hear in your neighborhood, there's the pops and clicks of the European starling. So all of those sort of tones of sounds are ways of saying, okay, the sound I'm listening to is this quality of sound. It's this kind of sound. Okay, so that helps me narrow down what I'm listening to. I know it's not, if it's fluty, I know it's probably a thrush or something similar to that. Also, there's the tempo. So you can contrast the blisteringly fast tempo of the winter wren with the white-throated sparrow, a slow, clear whistle. Then there are species where the tempo changes. And that becomes the sort of characteristic feature of the song. So something like a field sparrow that increases that bouncing ping pong ball dropped on a table. There's pitch. There are high-pitched sounds like cedar waxwings. And then there's lower sounds like mourning doves. And then there are species where the pitch changes. There's a trend in the pitch over the course of the course of the sound. So like the Downy Woodpecker, where you recognize it, it sounds like a woodpecker. It's that repetitive, but then it veers downwards in pitch as the sound progresses, which is always kind of handy. The Downy Woodpecker, it veers downwards. Some species repeat things in particular numbers. And so the brown thrasher was a wonderful example of, you know, it does a tremendous, it's one of the mimics, it does its tremendous variety of sounds, but it does almost everything twice. And so you can be very confused for a few seconds, and then all of a sudden you think, oh, right, it's a thrasher. Many of the songs can be broken up into different segments. So the song sparrow sound kind of has three fairly distinct segments to the sound. Nashville warbler has two. And finally, there are the mnemonics, and those tricks for remembering the pattern in the sound that often you can turn into words or phrases. And two of my favorites are the warbling vireo. Moving my cursor here. Okay. If I see you, I will seize you, and I'll squeeze you till you squeak. And it's the squeak at the end that is characteristic of that sound. It's this always, if I see you, I'll seize you, I'll seize you to squeak, right at the very end. There it is. And then the brown creeper, which says, creep, creep, I'm creeping around up here. Oh, where'd it go? Ah.
Oh, there it is.
Right? It's exactly what it just said. Right? And so there are ways of categorizing those sounds that are probably a little less intuitive than things like color, size, shape. But when you start to think about it, it doesn't take long to figure out, no, I got this. There's three parts to this song. The first part is clear and whistle. The last part is buzzy. And in the middle, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. And you can strategize and think about it in a systematic way like that. So getting into some of the tools for learning how to identify bird sounds, the Cornell website, again, I've mentioned it once already, I'll mention it again, it's just a tremendous resource. It's incredible. The allaboutbirds.org has all sorts of neat, field guide-like information, recordings of sounds, different photographs, and they also have, and I just mentioned a little bit here, they have classes. They teach online classes that you can enroll in on different aspects of bird ID, including sound. Dendroica, so www.natureinstruct, all one word, .org, is a freely available website that was put together a few years ago now by Environment Canada, the USGS, yes, and Canabio, the Mexican counterpart. It is a tremendous resource. It's probably starting to show its age a little bit. It's just a standalone website, but it still has an incredible range, collection of sounds. And so you can scroll through, well, here's, the Carolina wren, 14 different examples of different recordings of its sound, 24 different photographs. You can tweak this website. It'll quiz you. You can set up custom lists that it'll quiz you on. It's a pretty neat thing, and it's free, natureinstruct.org. There's the Merlin app. Now this little video that's playing, hopefully it's coming through in the side. It's an app on the smartphone, and I've videoed myself monitoring through it. One of the things you'll see here are these little histograms. These are the really cool tools that say, yeah, you might have heard a tree sparrow last week. It's a pretty common bird, okay? And then you can flip through here and say, maybe it was a fox sparrow. That's what a fox sparrow sounds like. Well, that didn't sound right. Maybe I was listening to a tree sparrow. And you can flip through and play a tree sparrow. Yeah, that's it. This happened to me just a couple of weeks ago at Stony Swamp in the Greenbelt. I was wandering around, and it's been a few years since I heard a tree sparrow because I don't get out nearly enough. And I was listening to tree sparrows, and I was rusty, and I was thinking, what is that? What am I listening to? I know I should know what I'm listening to. And Merlin helped out. It also works outside of North America. They have various bird packs that you can download. A few years ago, I got to go to Belize for a couple of weeks, and there's a Belize Merlin pack. And so you can have all of this same functionality when you're traveling. The Audubon Bird Guide, their app is a really neat smartphone tool as well. It has a pretty broad range of information. You know, if you're out wandering around with your kids and they're asking what you're listening to, if you could be so lucky that they care, and they're asking what you're listening to, and you can pull up the sound. Say, is this what you mean? And they're like, yeah, that's what I just heard. They're golden crowned kinglets. They're all around your balcony this week. And this, the other cool thing about the Audubon app is that it has all of this field guide and natural history information right there at your fingertips in each one of the species accounts. So another cool tool that is free. The Warbler Guide app, and I should apologize right off the bat for this recording. The sound and video, for some reason, I don't know, it doesn't like being recorded. They're a little bit out of sync, but the Warbler app is a little more expensive, but super cool if you're really getting into figuring out the warblers. All sorts of neat comparisons across that family. It's got this cool little 3D where you can rotate things. And the really neat thing about this app is it'll classify things based on similar songs. So if you're listening to a redstart, like we are right now, and you're listening to a couple of different redstart recordings, you can scroll down to the bottom here and you can say, okay, well, what is similar in sound to these redstars? And you can skip through a couple of these different recordings until you find the one that might be what you're confusing for that redstart. And that, for me, that similar sound or similar song feature is a real unique aspect of that app. So it's a little expensive, well, expensive in relation in a world where apps tend to be free, but it's just a brilliant tool for really pinning down the sounds of those warblers, which can be a little tricky. And then finally, the last app that I want to highlight is Larkwire, and this is a game. This is an app game where you can set it up and it'll quiz you different sounds. So right now it's quizzing me and I'm stepping through. Okay, got that one. It's Mourning Dove. I click Mourning Dove and it fires another one at me. Oh, flicker. Yes. Mourning Dove. And it tracks your progress. Oh, that's gotta be Robin. There we go. And so you can play this game and it learns with you and it learns what you're bad at. So if you start making mistakes, oh, and it also has text as well as photos. So it gives you descriptions in the background if you need the hint, the help. But this app also tracks your learning. And if there's a group that you're really bad at, it brings you back to that group over and over again. It prompts you to keep working at that particular group of birds or that particular species. If you get it wrong all the time, it'll bring it back to you. It's got a couple of different options. It's not cheap, anywhere from $4 to $45, depending on the pack that you download. But holy cow, this is just an incredible tool for learning in a really effective way and in a fun way. It's a little bit addictive to sit there and, you know, it's a video game version of learning bird sounds. So Larkwire. Unfortunately, it's available on the web and the iPhone. They don't have an Android version, which I don't know what's going on there. Okay, so you embrace those tools. If you've got a friend that knows bird sounds, chances are they're probably more than willing to tell you what you're listening to. In fact, if you've got a really good friend or perhaps a husband who birds a lot by ear, you'll wish they would stop talking about all the birds that are singing and pay attention to the conversation. But anyways, that's a whole other thing. And so once you get really good at it, then you can jump in and do these things called point counts. And bear with me for 2 seconds while I convince you that point counts are fun. They're a little overwhelming at the start because they're time limited. So you've got 5 minutes. You're like, oh my God, I gotta get everything down and everything's singing at once. And I'm totally overwhelmed. That's okay. You'll figure it out. Do a couple of practice ones, toss the sheets away, move on. As you get used to it, and you will very quickly, you can identify all, whatever, 19 birds that are singing around you on this, if you can imagine this little crosshairs here is a map with me standing at the middle, and there are house sparrows behind me, and there's black-capped chickadee over here, and there's blue jays over there, and there's a song sparrow over there, and I'm tracking all these things in my mind and writing them down on this little map so I can keep track of it. And 5 minutes later, you get to move on and run to the next place and do the same thing. And it's really fun. And as a person who in his day job works with the data that comes from this kind of surveying, I just can't stress enough how powerful that kind of data are. They're just tremendously useful, whether it's things like the abundance maps that you saw in the last atlas and that are going to get even cooler and prettier in the upcoming one, or the State of Canada's birds that came out 2 summers ago, with massive changes in some bird populations. Many of the data that go into these reports are derived from point count based observations, because the point count is a fairly rigorous way of recording information while you account for the effort expended in observing those birds. The same thing, that paper that came out, the 3 billion birds paper, there's a couple authors of that paper on this call, actually, I noticed. That paper is, 80%-ish of the species that are in that paper are there based on the North American Breeding Bird Survey, which is a point count based database. So your data are incredibly important, and being able to identify birds by sound is just a really powerful thing that you are going to love once you really get into. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Tony and Adam. I'm going to invite Vince now to maybe walk us through some of the questions, comments. And if anybody else has any questions, please use the chat function.
Yeah, or speak up too. That's totally
Sure.
fine.
Yep.
So one question, Adam, if you could repeat your mnemonics for warbling vireo and brown creeper.
So the one that works for me for warbling vireo is, if I see you, I will seize you and I'll squeeze you till you squeak. And it's, if I see you, I'll seize you and I'll squeeze you till you squeak. And it's the squeak part that is that high-pitched zip at the end of it that identifies the warbling vireo. And that's in the warbling vireo. If you're not familiar with that, head out to any of the walking trails in the city and around the city with the shrubs on either side, anywhere close to the river, and you will hear warbling vireos soon. Maybe not quite yet, but soon. Oh, and the brown creeper was creep, creep, I'm creeping around up here.
That's a good one. I like that one.
Speaking of mnemonics, of course, then we've got the bird that goes, here I am, up here, over here. Can you see me? I'm over here, up here, look over here. Here I am.
Yep, the red-eyed vireo.
There you go.
Yeah.
We just gonna scroll through the questions again to see if there's anything we missed, but I think we might have covered most things, unless you know how to tell apart silhouettes of ravens and crows.
Ooh. I'll hand that over to Tony.
What is the question?
How to tell apart ravens and crows when they're silent and you don't have a scale.
Well, okay. I find, well, the beak is massive The tail is wedge-shaped. The behavior is such that the wings of a raven seem far more flexible than that of a crow. Crow flies with a very stiff wing beat. Crows will sometimes also soar. I've seen them catch thermals with raptors. I've never seen crows do that. So basically, the smaller size of the crow and the stiffer wing beat and everything, they're a much more energetic bird, not quite as diversified in its behavior. And then the raven, of course, a bigger bird. The wings are really long compared to the size of the head. But then when you get a really good look at the head, it's got that big, thick, massive beak, and it also has that beard. So those loose feathers on the throat, and even the supercilium or the eyebrows there, that sometimes it will erect individual feathers there. So it's all basically shape. And so look at your field guides and study them. And when you're out in the field, of course, when you know you've got a raven, watch it very, very carefully. Watch how it flies, watch how it moves. And you may not hear the wings whistle, but you'll often hear them. They have such an incredible vocabulary. They talk, they're quite intelligent. And they've been known to communicate with other animals as well, bringing, alerting predators to where there's prey, things like that. So they have a rich vocabulary, but you got to be careful. You know, some crows have tricked me, especially if you're not seeing them under ideal conditions. But pay attention. So Nina says that when you're not sure, they're cravens. But I don't like to use that term too often. They're either crows or ravens.
Great, good answer. And another one that just came up is, do you have any tips on the trillers? For example, swamp sparrow, pine warbler, etc. They had a triller today in a big pine marsh near a marsh. Yeah, I guess habitat is a good way normally, but if you're both at a marsh and with pine trees, then maybe you can be a little more challenging.
Yeah, the trillers are incredibly difficult. Even experts who've been IDing birds by sound for years and years and years will disagree on recordings of trillers, even when they know the same habitat, et cetera, that kind of information. They're hard. There's overlap for sure, and you will be wrong from time to time on trillers. But that's okay. It all comes out in the wash. That's what the statisticians are for. We're all wrong sometimes. But in terms of the trillers, I think one of the really good things to know is what's around. And so time of year, particularly now, even for a couple of weeks, things can change really fast. Earlier in the season, you get lots of juncos. And you can learn to distinguish the tone of voice between juncos and chipping sparrows and some of the others. But early in the season you get lots of juncos. Later in the season the chipping sparrows start to show up. The swamp sparrows are fun. The swamp sparrows are trillers that for sure habitat is a really useful cue. But swamp sparrows, their trill sounds angry. I don't know what it is. Someone spit in their granola this morning, but swamp sparrows sound like they're yelling. There's this harshness and force to a swamp sparrow trill that is lacking in often from other ones. The chipping sparrows that are really common across Ottawa. If you're in the urban suburban areas and you're hearing a triller, you can start with chipping sparrow. That's by far the most common one, and then confirm that by what you're hearing, because it should be a dry, fairly long trill in relation to some of the others. So habitat, time of year, and during migration, in the peak of migration, there's all kinds of stuff that's trilling out there, and so don't write it off as being as being a chipping sparrow, go find it because it's probably something really cool and unusual.
Yeah, it's a pine warbler, honest.
But yeah, and then there's pine warblers, and the pine warblers, of course, often they'll give two different tempos, and so they'll switch tempos, and so you hear this sort of fast trill, and then you hear a slower trill, and then you hear a fast one again. Sometimes that'll happen. And pine warblers habitat is huge. If you're standing in a pine plantation, it's a good bet it's a pine warbler. If you're looking at a shrub or hearing it from a grassy lawn, it's probably not a pine warbler, but during migration, all bets are off.
I'd like to make a comment. I appreciate what you're telling there, Adam. What's probably helpful is if you download a free app. I have the voice record app, and so after you got the recording, you can always go back and compare the sonogram, and you'll be able to separate the pine warbler from your from your junco and so on. I think, but a lot of accuracy by just looking at the spectrograms.
Yeah. Yeah, again, another example. Thanks, Gerhard. Hi, Gerhard. It's another example where that technology is just incredibly powerful. And everyone, even just a cell phone, you'd be surprised often at the quality of the recording you can get just by opening up your cell phone and recording the sound around you, so that you can go home and compare it against all the different recordings that you've got at home. Yeah.
To follow up on that, there is a free app or program from Cornell as well as Raven, and the light version is free. It's a wonderful opportunity to review some of the bird songs, and I've used it for many years and comparing the different thrillers we just talked about. But if you don't have the equipment, I think you hear the song. I just search the bird out and see until you see his lips move. Then you know for sure who is singing. I think that's the true way to ascertain the right species.
Great, and I think we're through all the questions right now. So does anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask?
Okay, I don't see any hands up or any other comments, questions. To wrap things up then, I want to apologize for the link that was sent out. Yes, it was last week's link or a previous link, but folks do need to get back to Ottawa at Birds Ontario to get the passcode and the ID. So some folks did and some folks didn't. For those of you who were able to join us right off the bat, great. For those of you who joined a little late, my apologies. These are being recorded and you can catch the front end on YouTube when we get that posted. I want to thank our two guests, Tony Beck and Adam Smith, for taking the time to share their thoughts with us this evening. I think the takeaway from this evening is that whether you're a novice or an experienced birder, identification can be challenging. We're human and we make mistakes, but I hope through this evening's presentations and those of Tweetorial 2 on habitat and behavior, you're going to be able to effectively narrow down your choices through some straightforward tricks and good field experience. I can't, however, emphasize enough the importance, as I think both our guests tonight emphasize, the importance of field experience. Get out there, get some practice. Have a look at the habitat. Think about your impressions of the bird and be sure to simply have a listen. Before we wrap things up, I'd like to invite you to make plans to participate in our next tutorial on atlasing strategies and approaches next Wednesday. So please watch for details coming soon. Our Tweetorial series is very much a local initiative, but I would highly recommend that you explore the great material that Atlas headquarters has available. For example, there's a whole page of solid learning resources, most of it related to identification, that's available on the Atlas website. And I'm just going to quickly screen share that. There we go. Hopefully that's working. So at www.birdsontario.org, the site that you've all registered on, You'll see down here this wonderful little page, Learning Resources with Redneck Grebe and Young. You click on that page, and there's the URL there, birdsontario.org/learning, and they list a whole bunch of online assets, many of which are free. Some are course-based and so on and so forth, but please have a look at that material. Again, that's available on the Atlas website, birdsontario.org/learning. The other thing I'd like to mention, of course, are the province-wide SAPI hours that are hosted by Atlas headquarters. They're an absolutely great resource. There was one last night on atlasing and identification and codes. Those have been recorded as well, and they're available on YouTube and through the Atlas website. So I'd strongly encourage you folks to have a look and enjoy those. As well, the formal Atlas launch is coming up in 10 days' time on the weekend of April 24th and 25th. Workshops are being planned, so please keep an eye on the Atlas webpage and, of course, our local Facebook group for more information. That's all I have. Thank you for your time this evening. Have a great evening and be safe. See you next week.